We're going to be talking about government composition, particularly unitary and federal states. We classify states as unitary or federal based on where political power is concentrated. So a unitary state is where power is concentrated at the national level in the central/federal government. And there's more uniform policy since the policies are passed by the central government and apply to the entire country as a whole. So any type of law, any type of taxes are going to be the same regardless of where you are in a country. And we potentially see this as a more efficient way to make policy because there's only one body, the federal government, that policy making has to go through. There's only one body of people that need to write and pass the policy, the laws that are being made. When we're talking about politics and we're talking about the government, when we talk about policy making, we're talking about the creation of law, or as we would say, the creation of legislation. So we can see here in unitary states that decision making is a lot quicker. We have that the federal government, the central government, is the one making most or all of the decisions here. We don't have any local governments, any state or regional governments really having a say here in the policymaking process here. This also reduces regional variation in the laws because all the laws are passed at the national level. So they're going to apply at a national scale. We're not passing a lot of laws at the local or subnational or regional scale. So we're not going to have, like in the United States, we have different income taxes depending on which states you're in. In a unitary state, income tax is usually passed and it doesn't vary depending on what regions you are in. Power can only be transferred to smaller units. Power isn't shared between local governments. That could still exist. Power isn't shared, though, between the central and the local governments. If there are any local governments, such as Scotland inside the United Kingdom there, power is going to be transferred through devolution from high to low here. Remember, devolution is this concept that political power transfers from higher government to lower government. And we see that mostly in unitary states here. United Kingdom, France, China, Japan, all of those are great examples to know as unitary states. So just for a review here, a unitary state has political power concentrated in the central government at the national level, at a national scale. So it results in policy making being done at the national level. So the laws are more uniform. The decision making to make the policy making process is more quicker and more efficient, as that's the only body that they have to go through here. So here's a map showing all the unitary states throughout the world. You do not have to memorize all these, but I would know a few examples. Great examples are the ones in Europe. That's the region that College Board likes to assess the most when talking about unitary states. Are those states in Europe, such as the United Kingdom, France, or Spain, or Italy, for example. But a lot of countries in, of course, Africa, Central and Eastern Asia, as well as Western South America are unitary as well and have that political power centralized in the national government. So here's a past FRQ on unitary governments. We're going to talk about one positive aspect of a country having a unitary system. So we can see that the laws are more standardized, they're more uniform in their implementation across the country here because they're applied at a national scale. We see a lot more patriotism and pride in one's country being bolstered due to the uniformity within the national policy making and the ideas and the political sense of place as well here. Because like I'm from Florida, so a lot of times I align with, of course, what's going on in Florida and what's going on in my region here. And in a unitary government, since we're looking at more political power and influence from the national level, we see more nationalism and as a country-wide patriotism instead of more regional-based. Efficiencies are achieved through less duplication or faster countrywide implementation of laws or government services across different scales, because we see here that the national government is implementing all of these resources or services. They're not being applied differently by different regional or different local governments here. There are fewer government or taxation agencies. Like in the United States, some states have an income tax while we also have the federal income tax. So if you have a unitary government, typically you just see that federal income tax as well because you see those fewer scales of governments. The potential for corruption of local government is reduced because the local governments have less political power. We see the creation of a national identity that reduces the potential for devolutionary processes as well. Now let's look at another part of that FRQ that goes over the negative aspects, the disadvantageous impacts of having a unitary governmental composition. So we see that centralization of power at the national level that can lead to a disconnect with local areas, because local areas and regions, particularly in larger countries, have their own issues, have their own priorities, especially if they're populated mostly by minority groups or have regional-based political parties, or they're regions that are isolated from the rest of the country. They could be islands, for instance. We can see marginalization of local cultures through the standardization of policy, as well as maybe a national-wide culture that's trying to be implemented at a country, a national level here. Because in the national government, they're going to focus on what benefits the majority of the country and progresses the majority of the country as a whole. And there may be local cultures or minority groups that may feel marginalized, or their interests that are maybe different or unique are not being met or addressed within this centralized political government here. The central government may not effectively provide services on a subnational scale as well, because they're not looking at these local issues in these local areas as closely as a local government would. Decisions and policies of the central government could become dominated by interests of a dominant group instead of a minority group. The central government may not respond to local issues. They may respond very, very slowly to local issues such as natural disasters or infrastructure or just public services in general, such as education or healthcare here, because it may not affect the majority of the country, and the national government is looking at a national scale and not a local scale here. Now let's talk about federal states. Federal states divide power among the different levels of government, such as a central or regional or local government here. The power is shared here. That's the key word that I want you to remember here. We're not talking about devolution, which is power from high to low. We're talking about the sharing of power. So if you look at this diagram on the right here, when we're talking about a federal system of government here, power is shared between the central government and the multiple numerous regional or local governments as well. Both levels of government have their own spheres of authority here, and federal states are more likely to address these minority or local concerns or different groups of people that are found in certain regions that have their own priorities, their own issues within a certain area. And so these local governments have more authority and are more likely to respond to the economic, cultural, and social needs of an area, such as responding to a natural disaster that affected a certain region of the country. Regional governments usually assess education, law enforcement, zoning, taxes, infrastructure, other more local issues of an area. Power doesn't always go from high to low. It is shared. It can go from low to high, high to low. It is not just transferred at once. Some examples would be United States, Mexico, Russia, Brazil here. We look at a map of all the different federal states across the world. North America predominantly is full of federal states, as well as Eastern South America. We see parts of Eastern Africa, South Asia, Russia, Germany, Australia, Malaysia. All of those are federal states that have this shared power between the central and regional government. So here's another past FRQ. It's from that same FRQ. It's just the next prompt. Explain one reason for why some countries are not unitary states. Why are they federal states here? So we're going to be looking more at the pros, the advantages of being a federal state. So diverse states that have a lot of different culture groups, maybe a lot of different minority groups or ethnicities, or you can talk about different economic development levels across different areas. Maybe there's a lot of urban areas and a lot of rural areas that are going to be more economically developed or less economically developed. Maybe there's a lot of different political parties with a lot of different political interests across the country as well. These more diverse states may devolve power to local areas or regional governments to reduce separatist tendencies or to enhance loyalty to the country or just to respond to local interests. Federal governments are able to maintain national cohesion by bridging physical or cultural barriers or providing means for resolving conflicts between different regional or subnational areas here. Maybe there's a lot of tension between different culture groups. Federal governments can respond to that to eliminate or cease this tension or conflict. Large countries, those are typically what our federal states are, these larger countries. They devolve power to these subnational units in order to maintain legitimacy with local citizens or allow subnational units to be more effective in providing government services or address local issues. And what this part here, it's phrased really strangely. What this part essentially is saying here is that large countries can devolve power or provide power to these local governments that can assess local areas. What areas need more education funding? What areas have good healthcare but may have really bad infrastructure? That's going to vary depending on where you are in the country, what local area, what city that you're located in here. And so large countries that have different local, regional governments here can respond accordingly to their specific interests. As distance increases from a national capital, maybe people that are very, very far away from where the federal government is located in, and they feel like people who are from where they're located, their local area, are best fit to make political decisions about the area that they're located in, compared to people who are far away at the national capital, who may have never even been to the region or town or city that they're located in. So let's look at some examples of just a unitary state in action here. So the French government, a unitary country, exercises centralized authority over policies such as education with a uniform national curricula. We don't see any regional disparities or regional differences between the curriculums across France. We see that national implementation of curriculum. And there's standardized testing, of course, across the country. Saudi Arabia's monarchy will dictate policy that's going to follow Islamic Sharia law. So all the laws within Saudi Arabia must follow this religious Islamic Sharia law. And there are regional governments, and any regional governor is appointed by the central government. And that ensures that there is a consistent implementation and enforcement of national decisions and law. The Chinese central government imposed the one-child policy, which applied to all areas of China where parents were highly encouraged to have only one kid, or else they would face a lack of government services, and they would see tax differences. They would just get a lot of benefits for just having one kid here. There'd be a lot of disadvantages to having more than one kid too. The UK's National Health Service, the NHS, is centralized, with the Department of Health setting policies and funding levels. So they have national health care in the United Kingdom, and that's part of the unitary state here. And while Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have devolved health ministries, all policy decisions are ultimately made by this central government in Westminster, and that determines the overall NHS budget, for example, here. Now, let's look at federalism in action as well, in different ways that federal countries are showing that they're a federal country and have that shared political authority between the central and local government. So in India, states have power to create state-level police forces to handle law enforcement issues, as well as pass state-level criminal laws. So depending on what state you are within India, there are going to be different laws on what you can and cannot do. Australian state governments have their own systems for offering visas and immigration support, while the central government as a whole will control border security. And different states can provide different programs for immigrating to their state, or different visa systems. In Germany, one of the rare federal states of Europe, they have 16 states called landers. They have their own education systems. So compared to France, that has a uniform curriculum across the country, in Germany, each of the different lander have their own education systems. So we can see a lot of education differences depending on what state that you are in. And these differences can revolve around curriculum, exams, as well as school regulations. Switzerland is a multilingual country with 4 official languages, and the federal government ensures that all 4 of these official languages are documented and public services are available in these languages. However, the different regions of Switzerland, the cantons, have their authority to determine what language is used predominantly in that region. So what they're going to do is, what language do the people in this region speak the most? And that language is going to be taught the most and utilized in local schools. They're going to be put on the road signs. They're going to be used in courts and other government functions and processes as well. Let's look at one more FRQ here. Compared one difference in territorial organization between governments of unitary states and the governments of federal states. And this is a very long and drawn out promise. Essentially, what's the difference between a unitary and federal state? So unitary states have a top-down form of governance, while federal states have local-based power centers. Unitary states have a single government that expresses power over the entire territory, but federal states will divide that power among regional or local governments that control a limited portion of territory. Unitary states have a centralized system of government, a centralized system of administration with centralized law enforcement or education or infrastructure or natural resource management, whereas federal states have more dispersed power centers. Unitary states have a single system of territorial control, but federal states have multiple types of internal territorial systems, and that can depend based on the region's culture. We may see different land survey systems, different legal systems depending on the state that you're in, as well as the different ethnicities or nations depending on where you're located within the country as well. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really does help me out, and it costs $0. I have some free resources for you in the description down below if you'd like to use them. If you have any AP Human Geography related questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below the video or send me a message on Discord. I'll see you guys in the next video though. Adios.